Hi everyone, Michael here from Mirrors of Consciousness and creator of the Orbifold Tarot, which we're going to be using today for Samhain ritual and reading. So, happy Samhain everyone. Before we get into the spread, the ritual, and the reading, or reading method, I just want to go into a little bit of background. Most of that is some elemental stuff that is going to be review for some of you, but hopefully it'll be in a slightly condensed, recapped version. And if you would like to know more, you can always look back at the videos that I've done on casting circles and elemental correspondences and all that jazz. So Samhain is the time of year halfway between the fall equinox, the autumn equinox, and the winter solstice. It actually doesn't quite happen exactly halfway between, but it's very close, because it's celebrated on October 31st every year, and that's not always exactly in between, but it's close enough. And so what's kind of interesting about that time of year, the reason it's celebrated and some of the reason some of the stuff surrounding it is done the way it's done, or acknowledged the way it's acknowledged, is because nature is moving from a state of liveliness, and it's kind of reached its peak, its fruition, and everything is dying back. Everything is drying up and dying down and returning to the earth. And although most plants are not technically actually dying, they're just going into a period of stasis, they appear to die. The leaves fall off, the leaves die. Similar with insect species, they go into hibernation. Some of them die off for sure, but they've got their eggs and their nests and everything, and so everything's going to come back and rebirth itself in the spring. But that phase between autumn and winter is that phase of dying back and of at least preparing for hibernation, not necessarily hibernation itself, but certainly preparing for hibernation. So there's a peak, a collecting, and a finishing that are all sort of happening at the same time. And so a lot of the traditions, the human traditions that have come up around that, involve feasts. So all the stuff that we've collected, the harvest, we would have a feast from the harvest. And feasting season tends to continue in our modern world through Thanksgiving. In Canada, we actually already had our Thanksgiving, but those of you in the United States will have your Thanksgiving soon. And then, of course, there's more feasting at Christmas or during the Yule period, and New Year's and so on. But it really is set off by the harvest season that is on and around Samhain. And it can be helpful to look at the whole process and the traditions surrounding Samhain and relate them to yourself and relate them to your practice through the elements. At least that's how I relate to things, and that's how I make things meaningful for myself, especially when I don't necessarily follow the traditions, but I still want to acknowledge what the time of year or what the traditions are intended to acknowledge. With that in mind, we'll just take a little detour into elemental theory. So the cosmology that I ascribe to moves in terms of how the elements were created or are created, moves from subtle to gross. So most subtle to least subtle, being air, then fire, then water, then earth. So idea consciousness happens first, then execution, fire happens next. There's kind of a combustion that happens as your ideas come together, as air comes together, they combust, and that creates fire. And then from fire, there's kind of a precipitation, and that's in the form of water or liquidity. And then from water, which is now a little bit more tangible, a little bit more relatable. You can touch water. I mean, you could touch fire, but it's a bit hot. Same with air. You can, I'm touching the air, but it's harder to feel the air. It's harder to really acknowledge that the air is a real thing, compared to water, which is, you can hold it in a cup, you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it, you can drink it. It's more on the gross. It's kind of the transition from fire to water is from the subtle into the gross phase. And then from water then starts to congeal, starts to assemble, and starts to solidify into earth. But then the way that I associate the elements with the seasons, and many traditions have different ways of associating elements with seasons. If it makes sense to you, that's great. But in this case, and for this particular ritual and reading, at least try to let it make sense in the way that I view it. If you want to change it later for yourself, you can. But the seasons to me are related earth to winter. So earth is when everything's icy, everything's the most solid, everything's the most dense, and is the most stagnant. Earth is kind of that phase where time is slower, things don't move very much, and there's a bit of a dormancy, even though there's full reality, full manifestation. There's also a dormancy that happens at the peak of earth. And then from earth in the winter, as the temperature does warm up, which does involve a bit of fire, but it's kind of a movement. Think of it as a movement toward fire, and not really fire being at its peak. And so as earth warms up, it becomes liquid and things melt. The ice melts, and that melting, that water, then nourishes the growth that occurs in spring. And then from spring, it gets hotter, it gets progressively warmer, the days get longer, there's more fire, there's more heat involved in the environment, in all the processes. Things speed up a little bit more, there's more activity, all of that kind of stuff. So fire is summer, and then from that heat, things start to dry out and become a little bit more fragile, a little bit more frail, a little bit more ethereal. And so autumn then becomes air. It tends to be windier in autumn. Yes, we still get rain. It can still be quite wet, but things are drying out. Our skin dries out. The leaves that are falling to the ground are dry. The trees get drier. Everything is just a little bit drier as the cold is coming. And so it's almost as though in that kind of reversal of the order, where if we think of the elements being created from air through fire through water to earth, and then the seasonal development, we could say, or the seasonal progression of elements goes from most dense, earth, through water, through fire to air. It's almost in a way as though nature is trying to afford the elements to kind of return to their origin, to return to their primordial state where the elements haven't differentiated, where there's no element yet, although all are contained. And so that means that if autumn is air and then winter is earth, then the time between the peak of air and the peak of earth, that time is kind of a bit of a liminal time. It's a period in that cycle where the elements make a jump from almost being returning to their source, their essence together, collectively, their essence in a non-manifest state, to suddenly being fully manifested at earth and yet dormant. So there's a little jump, there's a little, it's not as smooth a transition from earth through water, through fire to air. When air jumps back to earth, there's a jump. And so that jump happens on and around the period of Samhain. That's how this is related to Samhain. And so, people will talk about the veil, seeing beyond the veil, or the veil thinning, the veil being that division, that split between the least tangible, the peak of air, and the most tangible, the peak of earth. And so in that time period of jump, we're also kind of most able to be sensitive or be aware of that potential for not just the subtle to become gross and skip the steps of fire and water, but also for the gross to become subtle. Because if a process can go one way, it can go the other. There's another idea that's kind of cool about the veil that I think of, is around Samhain. There's stuff to do with mirror magic and reflection, and so there's a little bit of an idea of there being another world on the other side of reflection, on the other side of the mirror. Almost like if you could step through the mirror, there would be an alternate reality that is a reflection. It's a balance of this side, but it's also kind of running opposite. So in a way, that movement of elements from air through fire through water to earth is happening even though the natural cycle is to go from earth, water, fire, air. The other side, the mirror image of that, is moving air, fire, water, earth. It's reversing the elemental process. And we actually enact that often. The way that things tend to become more manifest is first we think about them, then we take actions to make that happen, and then we, as it's happening, it's a little bit more fluid. It's not fully created yet, but it's tangible, but there's still change involved. There's an ability to change things, and then it becomes solid. And so we're doing that all the time, although the natural cycle is kind of reversing that by going earth, water, fire, air. So all that just to say that in that jump phase between air and earth is a great time to take the fullest advantage of your ability to either skip some of the steps, skip some of the elements from air to earth, or vice versa, but also to acknowledge that process from air to earth and earth to air can kind of flow back and forth even when perhaps our normal way of functioning is moving from subtle to gross, but it's actually really, they're both always happening at the same time. But it's a good opportunity to just take a moment and acknowledge that both can happen, and reflect on the reflections, the opposite. The elemental process, it's not just about the elemental process or alternate universes or things like that. I like to think about that sometimes. But it's also about acknowledging the dead and death in general, the process of death in general, something that we tend, again, in our normal day-to-day life throughout the year, through most of the year, for most people, we prefer not to think about death and not acknowledge it even, and instead prefer just to pretend like life is going to happen forever, and that whole process it's just a continual process of growth and growth and growth and growth. But the reality is that that's not true, right? That which grows must die, and from the death of one thing, other things are permitted to grow. This is the cycle. And it, even though that's happening all the time, and we could take a moment in the springtime, we can certainly take a moment as the buds sprout out from the earth, and as things start to grow and as new things happen, we could take a moment and say, this too will die. But that tends not to be the way that we look at things in general, especially for people who are of a more positive outlook, or prefer a more positive outlook. They'll often say, I don't want to think about the end of this. And yet everything ends, like it will end. And it's thought of as being depressive. If you're always thinking about the ending of something and focusing on that while something's beginning, people usually say, oh, well, you're so negative, and I'm like, no, that's just the reality. But Samhain is a period of time where that acknowledgement is more acceptable, is more welcoming, because it's all around, right? We see the leaves falling to the ground, and the days are getting shorter, and so just the reality of the natural world around us is showing itself to us, and it's saying, yes, things end, things die, and that death and that dormancy, that death kind of lasts, in a sense, through winter, even though we still continue to go to work or go on holidays. Some people are lucky to go on holidays in the winter. But even though life goes on for us, nature is in a state of dormancy. And it's not that nothing happens. There are still lots of things that happen, and there's animals that thrive in the winter and all of that stuff. But it is a state of relative dormancy, we'll say. And so Samhain is a period of time where you get an opportunity to acknowledge that. And then in that acknowledgement, we're also acknowledging or exploring even. Some people have very concrete ideas about what happens after death. Some people have no idea what happens after death, and aren't too bothered by figuring out what happens. The reality is, none of us really know. There are lots of people have had lots of different experiences, and that colors their beliefs. It's a mystery, and so again, normally it's usually kind of frowned upon to delve too deep into mysteries, especially the mystery of what happens after death. But then at Samhain or Halloween, and I know they're not the same thing, but for kind of the average person who's not involved in paganism or witchcraft, Halloween, they recognize Halloween. They don't celebrate Samhain, they recognize Halloween at the same time. And there are a lot of similarities and a lot of crossovers. And so even for the average person, it's an opportunity for them to explore the mystery of death and the mystery of what happens after death, and be curious about what happens beyond death, if anything. And so Samhain is also an opportunity for us to explore that phenomena and either affirm our beliefs about it or question our beliefs about it, or make room for new possibilities for beliefs about that whole subject, but also explore and confront our discomfort with the subject of death and the subjects of what happens beyond death and what causes death. Beyond just natural cycles, like why does it have to happen, and all that stuff. And it can be, for some people, it can be a really uncomfortable topic, but again, even though Halloween and Samhain are different things, the culture of Halloween being kind of a fun and celebratory thing, it kind of makes it more acceptable. It opens and welcomes that exploration and makes it a little bit less scary for a subject that can be very scary for all of us to explore. Through acknowledging death and the reality of death, we also, it actually turns into, or it can turn into, a celebration of life. And so that's where it ties back again to feasting and just acknowledging, like, look at this bounty, look at this harvest that has come, and this is the result of life, the natural world living, and then in its death, in that process of nature kind of dying back and coming into dormancy, we can both acknowledge that death, but also celebrate the life that occurred. So it's that idea of implicit in birth is death, and so it can come kind of full circle, and it's just kind of much more in our face, but then in the natural world, but then we can kind of explore and push that a little bit more due to the changing light and due to the traditions that have come about logically from that reality. So I'm sure there was a few other things that I wanted to say about that, but without further ado, I'm going to go a little bit into the ritual and the reading. There are 3 versions of this that you could do. You could further break it up or add to it into other versions if you prefer, but there's 3 main versions. There's a short version, a long version, and an extended version. The short version and the long version, I would suggest to do on Samhain Eve, on October 31st, and to contemplate overnight, perhaps even consider as part of your dream work, if you do dream work, and all of that. The extended version, for those of you who would like to explore the theme for a few days, is a great variation that you could start on October 30th, continue on October 31st, and then finish and continue and finish on November 1st. So, I mean, you could do them all together, but in the extended version, it's nice to give it time for things to kind of settle and seep in. Even though we're using the Orbifold for this example of the ritual and the reading, you can use any tarot deck. You could also use playing cards if you've been into playing card cartomancy lately, like I have. And I'll go through the playing card variation at the end. But with your tarot deck, you will need to separate your majors and your minors. It's actually a majors only reading. There are also ways to incorporate the minors later that I'll go into after, but it's a majors only reading. In addition to that, though, you will need your 4 aces if you're doing the short version. And if you're doing the long or extended version, you'll need your 4 aces as well as 4 court cards. The Knight of Air, the Queen of Fire, the Page of Water, and the King of Earth. So basically, and if you're using a different tarot deck, you'll need Fire of Air, Water of Fire, Earth of Water, and Air of Earth. And that will round out the long and extended versions. I actually did this reading and filmed the reading a couple of days ago. I wasn't very happy with how the video came out, but I'm going to repeat the reading with the same cards that I drew, just because I like to go with the initial draw. And so I'm actually not going to show the physical cards through the reading. I'm going to show them in digital form with some fun little animation for you as I talk through it. If you're using the Orbifold, not only are you going to take out your majors and your 4 aces and your 4 courts, but you're also going to take out of your majors pack, you're going to take the Void and Manifestation. If you're using a regular tarot deck, there's a few alternates that you could use. I'm going to suggest, since it is a season that acknowledges death, I'm going to suggest that you take your Death card and your Wheel card out as alternates for the Void and Manifestation. And you'll see why. So first step is to lay down your Void and Manifestation cards in the center of the spread. The Manifestation card goes face down, so the face of the card is against the table or the surface you're reading against, and the Void card is going to be turned face up. With the Void card or Death card, if you're using a regular tarot deck, turned face up, just take a moment and meditate on the concept of the Void and or the concept of death, the concept of elements returning to and springing from not quite nothingness, but their potentiality, where that place where the elements have dissolved into indistinguishability, if that's a word, but also are having the potential of springing forth into distinguishable elements from that potentiality. And one thing that I like to do in that process of entering the void, entering that state of considering voidness, is actually hold the card and pull the card towards you, and then move the card away from you. Pull the card towards you, toward the eyes, and then away. So that you're it's causing your eyes to have to focus near and far, and it creates a kind of a blurriness between your consciousness and your subconsciousness, reality and unreality, or reality and the other side of reality. And so it's just a useful way to begin and start to enter that space where you can do a more meaningful ritual and a more meaningful reading. The next step is going to lay down the 4 elemental cards, so the 4 aces, and you're going to do that in the reverse order, so in the natural seasonal order, going from most dense to most subtle. And this, in a way, is laying down the seasons in an acknowledgement of the past year. One part of Samhain and Samhain rituals is reflecting over your past year. So the first ace you're going to lay down is the Ace of Earth on the left side. And as you're laying down the Ace of Earth, not only are you bringing Earth into your circle and just acknowledging Earth in your four corners, because this is also a circle building process. This is the first stage of a ritual as building a circle. But when you lay down that earth card, consider that in this instance, earth is not just representing earth and the previous winter, but it's also representing your offering of the season. What offering are you going to make for the season? The considerations of what are you harvesting this season, and from that harvest, what nourishes you, and that can be the in relationship to the previous year, the year that's gone by, the previous winter, but it can also be in relationship to the coming winter and the coming earth, then just the earthiness that has threaded its way through the entire year of and what's going to continue into the following year. So your offering, in a way, is also a sense of gratitude for the previous year, and then what you're going to be grateful for, what ways you're going to make an offering for the following year. And these are all just things to consider as you're considering the Earth card and placing it in your circle. Next, you're going to lay down the Ace of Water at the bottom of the spread, at the bottom of the circle. And the Ace of Water is, again, not just representing the spring of last year, although you can certainly take a moment to reflect on the spring of last year, the past year, but in general, it's also representing reflection overall. It's representing also your shadow and your unconscious. So things that may have happened over the year that you're maybe not so proud of, maybe some of your flaws that were revealed to you over the past year. And so that could represent also things to work on through the upcoming year. But at the same time, it is a reminiscence card, reflection card, and so reminisce over your accomplishments of the past year, things you've made progress on, things even to celebrate, although water isn't really a celebration phase, but you can start to move into that mindset. What kind of things can you acknowledge and celebrate? Next, you're going to lay down the Ace of Fire in the right-hand position. And as with the previous aces, this is not just for reflecting over your summer that only fairly recently passed, but it's also representing the guiding light. One of the traditions of Samhain is, of course, to light candles or to leave lights to guide spirits from the kind of liminal world, from the veil toward the other side, toward their destination. And or, depending on the tradition, the lights are there as beacons to call the spirits from the other side in order to pay homage to them before they go back during that period where the veil is thin. And so the Ace of Fire is going to represent your guiding light. And so just contemplate the things that might cause you or might aid you in continuing, in leading you back on your path if and when you get lost throughout the year. So what kind of beacon would you look for, would you like to have in the coming year, and what beacon, what was your beacon over the past year? Not just through the summer. Maybe the summer was your beacon. Who knows? Or a nice warm holiday. Maybe that was your beacon. But what's that thing that drew you back to, drew your focus back to where you want to be, to what you're doing, especially whenever you felt lost over the year? It also, the fire position is also going to represent the way you present yourself. And so that includes things that you want to express in the coming year, things to focus on, the way that you present yourself in your clothes, in your manner, and your image. And that may seem fairly superficial, yet at the same time, reflecting on that in the ritual space may help you to reconcile the potential superficiality of acknowledging your image with how to create that image, how to present that image in a way that is natural and authentic to you. The next and last ace that you're going to place is the Ace of Air, and that position is going to represent things to cleanse and resolve. So things over the past year to send on, to let go of, things that as you let go of those things, as you send them off, how are they going to lighten your soul and your mind? And then beginning also to think about, in the coming year, any of your wishes and any of your resolutions that you might want to make. If you're doing the extended version, that would be the entire day one process of the extended version. And in your process, you would add to all of that journaling about each of those positions, journaling about what Earth means in this context of offerings, nourishment, gratitude, all of that kind of stuff. And you may also consider in your journaling how your offering feeds your guiding light. So the Earth feeds fire. Earth position relates to the fire position and feeds it. Similarly, as you're journaling, consider how your reflection position, the water position at the bottom, feeds or informs, I would say, informs your air position of things to let go of, things to send on, things to resolve, things to cleanse away. So that would all be the entire first layer, first stage of the process. If you're doing the short version, then you can go right ahead into shuffling your majors, and I'll go on to that step in a moment. If you're doing the long version, same thing. And then if you're doing the extended version, you would save that until day 2. There's a few steps in day 2. So in the short version, at the same time, you'll lay out your majors, and the order of the majors is the same. You'll place a major on the earth position, you'll place a major on the water position, you'll place a major on the fire position, you'll place a major on the air position, and relate each of the majors to those concepts. So the earth position is going to be your offering, your nourishment, your harvest, your gratitude, all of that stuff. The major that you place on the Ace of Water is going to be your reflection, your recollections, your reminiscence, your acknowledgement of accomplishments and progress over the year. Just general reflections, and also things to work on regarding your shadow or your flaws in the coming year. So that major could reveal a little bit of both. Then place a major on the fire ace. That's going to represent your guiding light and how you present yourself in the coming year. And then finally, then a major on the air card, the air ace. And again, that's going to relate to things to cleanse and resolve, things to let go of, things to send on, things to clear away, and any wishes or resolutions that you want to make. And you can do the same relationships between earth feeding fire and water informing air. Then, to finish up that stage of the process, this is where the short version and the longer version and the extended version differ. If you're doing just the short version, you're going to draw one more major and place it in the center on top of the void card. This is kind of your spiritual guidance card. This is your awakening. This is any secrets that you want to reveal or secrets that have been revealed over the past year. This is your spiritual ideal. If you do speak to ancestors, if you do spiritual or mediumship type work, this is the place where that ancestral message or that spiritual message will come through. It may also give some insight into any unknown truths that may be revealed to you through the upcoming year. If you're doing the long version or the extended version, you can make your decision as to what you want to do, but I would actually save that central position, that central major, for later in the process. And so also if you're doing the long version, save that central card. If you're doing the extended version, you would journal about those 4 cards, the 4 elemental cards, and again, save the 5th major for later. We'll look at that again later. But if you're doing the short version, after you've placed the 5th major in your short version, and you've contemplated that, then you will turn over all of the cards in the reverse order that you laid them. So turn over the central, I'd actually leave the central major, but the rest of them I would turn over in reverse order. So you turn over your air major, your fire major, then your water major, then your earth major, then turn over the ace. You could turn the major and the ace at the same time to close off. But then turn over the ace of air, ace of fire, ace of water, ace of earth. Then turn over the entire central pack. Take that all as one pack. So you've got 2 cards face up, that's your major and your void card, and there's 1 card face down, which is the manifestation card. Turn the whole thing over so that the manifestation card is all that's left. If you're using a regular tarot deck, that's going to be the wheel card. And it's at that point then, now that you've closed the elements, you've closed everything else, that you set things into motion for the coming year. In the long version, you don't close all of that stuff. You don't close any of it. You don't even draw your 5th major yet. Instead, between each of the aces, you're going to put the corresponding court cards. And those court cards you're going to lay in a clockwise order. So you'll place your Knight of Air between the Ace of Air and the Ace of Fire. So the Knight, representing fire, of air is representing the completion of the air cycle and the movement into the fire cycle. And he's also representing actions to take in the first quarter of the year to set your plans into motion. Whatever plans you may have for the next year, what actions are you going to take to set those plans in motion? Then place the Queen of Fire between the Ace of Fire and the Ace of Water. And she's going to represent the passions that you need to cultivate and exemplify over the second quarter, both in relation to your goals, but just in general, what passions you should cultivate and exemplify. Sometimes we have more than one thing going on, so it doesn't have to necessarily be about that project or the main things that are going on. It could just be your general passions that you want to cultivate and exemplify. And then between the Ace of Water and the Ace of Earth, you're going to place the Page of Water And this will be the space for feelings to consider as things come to fruition. At the third quarter, this is kind of the ripening of the year, the period where we're not yet in autumn, but things are ripening, things are coming to fruition. It's just near or just barely past the peak of summer, the summer solstice. So this is that period where you're considering things that are coming to fruition, but in particular, consider your feelings about that. How do you feel about how this is coming into being? And then lastly, for the fourth quarter, leading up to next year's Samhain, between the Ace of Earth and Ace of Air, you're going to place the King of Earth. And here you'll consider to acknowledge the mastery you've gained over the year. So what mastery would you like to gain over the next year? This is that position. So in the long version, you'll just kind of consider those as you lay them down. Notice there that even though we're going clockwise, which is in the direction of regular time, the elemental development is in reverse. So we're still playing a little bit with clockwise and counterclockwise. We're playing with formation of the elements and dissolution of the elements, and we're playing with balancing the elements so that in the time of year that page of water is in, that's actually the phase of the year that would normally be fire moving into air, summer moving into fall, but we've got earth and water there to balance out those elements. And then similarly, on the opposite side of the wheel, where the night of air is in, fire and air, that's balancing out that period at the darkest point of winter, or not really the darkest point, but just past the darkest point, or leading up to the darkest point and then past it, where it's dominated by earth and water. You're balancing that with fire and air. And so on around the wheel. The second quarter, where it's Queen of Fire, it's water and fire, and that actually is still going to correspond with the elemental change in that season, is water turning to fire. So we're going also into a kind of resonance with the season, and then we're going out of resonance to balance, and then into resonance. So then again, at the fourth quarter, as we're going leading into Samhain, we're back to earth and air with the King of Earth. So we're kind of playing through the spread and through the ritual and through the divination of for the upcoming year. We're continuing to play with that elemental balance and that idea of reversals. Reversal of elemental balance, reversal of time in a sense, and reversal of reality in a way too. So after you've placed the court cards, of course you're going to place 4 more majors on top of each of those court cards, and those majors you're again going to relate each of those majors to each of those concepts. So the major that goes between the Ace of Air and Ace of Fire over the Knight of Air is going to represent so after you've considered actions to take, this is going to show you how. This is what actions to take to set your plans in motion. When you place the card over the Queen of Fire, this is like your guidance. This is your advice about what passions to overcome, what passions to cultivate rather, and exemplify. And so on. Then finally, you would place, if you're doing the long version or the extended version, you would place in this case now, a 9th major in the center. It's the last major that is laid. And then if you're just doing the long version, like in one sit, in one session, then you can close it similarly to how you closed the short version, or how I suggest to close the short version. Leave the major in the center turned up, leave the center alone, but turn over the quarterly cards, the cards that are over the quartz first. Then you can close each of the quartz, and do it in reverse order. So you're now going counterclockwise, and then going clockwise, you're going to turn over the majors that are over each of the aces, and then turn over each of the aces to close the elements. Then finally turn over the entire central pack to manifestation, and it's the same business. Manifestation card remains the only card face up, and you focus on that to set into motion the entire process. The extended version's not that much different, except in the extended version, day one is going to be just laying down the aces and the voided manifestation cards in the center, and then journaling about them. Day two is going to be laying down the majors, journaling about those, and then also laying down the quartz and journaling about those in their respective positions. Then day three is going to be laying down the majors on top of the quartz and the central major, journaling about those, and then closing it all up. So really the difference between the long version and the extended version is just that you're breaking up the steps into 3 days instead of 1 day, and you're adding the step of journaling. That's really the only difference between the long version and the extended version. I'll also mention here that this space, the entrance to the reading, the entrance to the laying of cards, is done through the gap between earth and air, because that again is that jump between elements from subtle to gross and gross to subtle. So we're thinking, when we lay down that first major, we're thinking, even though you're laying it on top of the earth card, you're thinking of entering the circle, entering the spread with that major through the gap, through the veil, through the jump between air and earth. So just keep that in mind, and that's why we're going counterclockwise, both in the laying of the elemental cards, the aces, and then we're also going counterclockwise. We're continuing counterclockwise. We've gone over that jump again from air to earth. We're continuing counterclockwise as we lay the majors. The elements are going in order seasonally as we go counterclockwise. So there's, again, that balance. We're going like in order and out of order. In order of the elements, but out of order in terms of counterclockwise. And then when we place the quartz, we're going clockwise, but yet we're going out of seasonal order from subtle to dense. So there's this constant play between reverse order, common order, or natural order. Natural order of time, natural order of elements, and then reverse order, so that we've always got the thing and its reflection, the thing and its reflection. There are a plethora of other variations that you could try. I hope that wasn't too complicated. I'll try to post something that is a little bit more point by point in written form for you to follow, print out and follow. That'll make it a bit easier, because you probably don't want to do this reading listening to me talking. But this is just kind of your prep, your pep talk for the spread before you perform it. So once again, happy Samhain. Be sure to talk to all kinds of lovely people, living and dead, and not just people, but loved ones. And I will be back again soon, probably with another cartomancy video. See you soon.